50 years ago, if you flew over the interior of the UAE, you would have seen almost nothing. Just sand, endless, unbroken sand stretching to every horizon. No roads, no crops, no water, no life, just heat and silence. Today, something extraordinary is growing out there in that same desert. Rows of solar panels stretching so far across the landscape that they disappear into the haze. Greenhouses rising from the dunes. Fields of crops in a land where rain almost never falls. Fish farms operating in one of the hottest and driest places on Earth. Engineers call it a transformation. Scientists call it an experiment at a scale never attempted before. And the people who built it call it a necessity. Because here is the thing that doesn't immediately make sense. The UAE sits on some of the largest oil reserves in the world. It has the money, the infrastructure, and the energy to run almost anything. So why would a nation built on oil pour billions of dollars into solar power and desert farming? Why would engineers spend decades trying to grow food in a landscape that was never meant to support it? And what exactly did they discover when they started digging into the ground beneath all that sand? The answer is not what most people expect, and it changes the way we think about deserts entirely. The UAE is not a place where things grow easily. It receives less than 100 millimeters of rain per year in most regions. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius. The soil, where it exists at all, is mostly sand and salt. For most of human history, large-scale agriculture here was simply impossible. But something shifted in the late 2000s. UAE officials began quietly commissioning studies, soil surveys, water mapping, satellite analysis of land that had never been seriously evaluated before. And what those studies revealed made engineers stop and look twice. Beneath certain stretches of desert, particularly around Abu Dhabi and the Al Dhafar region, there were underground water reserves. Ancient aquifers formed thousands of years ago when the climate was completely different. Not enough to sustain a nation, but enough to ask a question. What if the desert itself could be changed? The first serious answer came in 2013, when the UAE broke ground on what would become the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park outside Dubai. At the time, it was described as ambitious. That word would later seem like an understatement. Engineers didn't just build solar panels. They started studying what happened to the land underneath them, and what they found growing in the shade of those panels, in soil that had produced nothing for centuries, was the first sign that something unexpected was happening out in the desert, something that nobody had fully planned for. But before they could understand what they were seeing, they needed to ask a more uncomfortable question. Where was the water coming from? The water question didn't have a simple answer. Hydrologists brought in to study the Al Dhafar region noticed something unusual in their groundwater readings. In areas directly beneath the solar panel arrays, moisture levels in the upper soil layers were measurably higher than in the surrounding open desert. It wasn't rainfall. There had been almost none. It was condensation. The panels, it turned out, were acting like giant shade structures. During the cooler desert nights, moisture from the air was collecting on the underside of the panels and dripping slowly into the soil below. It was a small amount, almost negligible by agricultural standards. But in a desert, even a small amount of water changes everything. Researchers from Master Institute, the UAE's clean energy research arm, began monitoring the effect more closely. What they documented over the following months was difficult to explain at first. Microclimates were forming. Directly beneath the panel fields, air temperatures were several degrees cooler than the surrounding desert. Humidity was slightly higher, and in that narrow band of altered conditions, biological activity was increasing. Insects appeared, then small desert plants. Then, in some areas, soil microbes that hadn't been detected in that land for decades. The desert was not just generating power. It was quietly, almost invisibly, beginning to come alive. But the engineers monitoring the project weren't celebrating yet, because the same water mapping that revealed the condensation effect also revealed something far more troubling about the aquifers beneath the surface, something that would force the entire project to change direction. The aquifer data came back in early 2017, and the numbers were not good. In several regions where the UAE had begun experimental irrigation projects alongside the solar farms, the underground water reserves were depleting faster than anyone had projected. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but steadily. And in a desert, steady depletion is its own kind of emergency. Water that had taken thousands of years to accumulate could be gone within generations. The project faced a fundamental contradiction. To grow food in the desert, you need water, but the only water available was finite, irreplaceable, and already under pressure. Something had to change. That was when a separate team of agricultural scientists working out of the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture in Dubai proposed an idea that most traditional farmers would have dismissed outright. Stop fighting the desert's condition. Start farming with them. The proposal was radical in its simplicity. Instead of importing freshwater-dependent crops and trying to sustain them in hostile conditions, researchers argued for developing farming systems built specifically around salt-tolerant plants, minimal water use, and the natural temperature cycles of the desert environment. The UAE government listened, and then they did something that surprised even the scientists who proposed it. They didn't just approve the research, they scaled it immediately. What came next would produce results that even the most optimistic projections hadn't anticipated, but it would also reveal a problem buried much deeper than anyone had thought to look. The scaled-up operation centered on a location most people outside the UAE had never heard of: Al Ain, an ancient oasis city sitting on the border with Oman, surrounded by desert on nearly every side. Engineers chose it deliberately. The region had a history of human agriculture stretching back 4,000 years, sustained by an ancient irrigation system called the Falaj. Underground channels, hand-dug centuries ago, that moved water from distant mountains to fields and settlements without a single pump or motor. The people who built those channels understood something modern engineers were only beginning to rediscover. In the desert, water management isn't about abundance, it's about precision. The new agricultural facilities built around Al Ain and the broader Al Dhafar region combined that ancient logic with modern technology. Hydroponic and aeroponic systems that used up to 90% less water than conventional farming. Closed-loop irrigation that recycled every drop. Crops selected not for yield alone, but for their ability to survive and produce in extreme heat. And above it all, the solar panels kept generating power. For the first time, the pieces were connecting. Solar energy making desert farming possible. Desert farming reducing food import dependency. And the land itself slowly responding. But when soil scientists took deep core samples from beneath the oldest panel fields in late 2021, they found something in the layers that stopped the research team cold. Something that had no immediate explanation. Something that suggested the desert was changing in ways that went far beyond anything the project had intended to produce. The soil core samples told a story that took months to fully interpret. In the deepest layers beneath the oldest solar fields, scientists found something that desert soil almost never contains in measurable quantity: organic matter. Not much. Not by the standards of fertile agricultural land anywhere else in the world, but enough to matter. Enough to suggest that years of condensation, shade, microbial activity, and careful farming had begun a process that soil scientists have a specific name for: pedogenesis, soil formation. The desert was not just being farmed in small but measurable ways. It was beginning to generate the biological conditions necessary to become farmable land on its own. It was early, fragile, easily reversible if the projects were abandoned, but it was real. Dr. Shaji Mandaitan, a soil researcher involved in the analysis, described it carefully in his published findings. He noted that the timescales involved were still enormous. Genuine soil development would take generations, not decades, but the direction of change was clear. The UAE had set out to generate solar power in an empty desert. In doing so, it had accidentally begun one of the largest unplanned desert restoration experiments in human history. Today, the Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park is on track to become one of the largest single-site solar installations on Earth. The agricultural projects surrounding it produce fish, vegetables, and livestock feed in quantities that would have seemed impossible to anyone who stood in that same desert 50 years ago. The sand is still there, but underneath it, something is growing, slowly, quietly, in the shade of 10,000 solar panels. And what it becomes next depends entirely on whether the world is paying attention. If this story made you think differently about deserts and what they're capable of, subscribe for more documentaries like this one. There's always more beneath the surface.